Eleanor did not mean to overhear. The hallway leading to the library at Ashford House was lined with portraits of dead dukes, and she had only been returning to the drawing room after checking on her elderly aunt. The door stood ajar 3 inches, enough to let candlelight stripe the marble floor, enough to let her husband's voice reach her with perfect clarity. "She'll forgive me, she always does." Eleanor's hand stopped halfway to the door handle. The voice belonged to Alexander, the 6th Duke of Ashford, her husband of 5 years. She knew his every inflection, the lazy confidence he wore like a second skin. She stood motionless, the silk of her gown suddenly cold against her legs. A woman laughed, Lady Cecilia Haverford. Eleanor recognized the breathy, practiced sound. She had watched Cecilia circle her husband for 2 seasons, had noted the too long glances, the hands that lingered when he helped her from a carriage. But she had trusted Alexander. She had loved him. "You are the most arrogant man in England," Cecilia said, her voice dripping satisfaction. "Merely a realist. Eleanor adores me. It's tedious, really. A few tears, a new necklace, and she'll welcome me back into her good graces like a lamb. You'll see. Give it a fortnight and she'll even be civil to you at dinner." Eleanor's stomach turned to stone. The words did not land as simple cruelty, they landed as truth, a truth he had believed so thoroughly that he spoke it without a flicker of guilt. She had become a mechanism he could reset with gifts and soft words. 5 years of marriage, of overlooking his absences, his coldness, his half-spoken apologies, and this was the harvest. She did not gasp. She did not burst through the door in righteous fury. A new instinct, colder and sharper than any she had known, gathered itself in her chest. She lowered her hand, stepped back from the light, and walked the length of the corridor with silent, deliberate steps. In her private sitting room, she dismissed her maid with a smile that felt like glass. Then she sat at her escritoire and wrote a letter, not to Alexander, to her housekeeper at Greywood Cottage, a small property in Yorkshire she had inherited from her godmother 6 years ago. The Duke had never troubled himself to learn the details of that bequest. He considered Yorkshire beneath his notice. Eleanor had kept it as her one secret, her silent rebellion, a place that belonged only to her. She penned a short note to her husband, left it on his pillow. The words were simple. "I heard every word. I'm not your lamb. Do not search for me." She took only her personal jewels, a leather satchel of letters, and the clothes her maid could pack in 30 minutes. By the time the great house settled into sleep, Eleanor Gray, for she would be only that now, had climbed into a hired coach with her maid Betsy, and the road north swallowed the carriage whole. Greywood Cottage was not grand. It crouched on the edge of the North York moors, a 2-story stone house with ivy climbing the east wall and a walled garden gone slightly wild. The air smelled of heather and peat smoke, and the vast silence felt like a sanctuary after the constant noise of London. The steward met her at the gate. Nathaniel Cross was not what Eleanor expected. He stood perhaps 6 feet tall, shoulders squared as though he still wore a uniform, though his coat was plain wool and his boots were mud-spattered. His face was lean, with a jaw that looked carved from the same gray stone as the cottage, and his eyes, a steady, penetrating brown, held hers without flinching. "You must be Mrs. Gray," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, with a northern burr softened by years away from home. "I'm Cross, your godmother's steward. I received your letter." Eleanor had signed her correspondence Eleanor Gray, erasing her title, burying the name Ashford like a body in an unmarked grave. "Thank you for remaining, Mr. Cross. I know my arrival is sudden." A steward stays until the new owner releases him. He took her valise without being asked, his manner neither deferential nor presumptuous. "The house has been aired, and Mrs. Timms, the housekeeper, has a meal waiting. The roof in the east bedroom needs repair, but the rest is sound." She followed him inside, acutely aware that he asked no questions. A widow, perhaps, he thought, or a woman escaping something. The lack of prying was its own form of kindness. That evening, Eleanor sat in the small, book-lined parlor, a tray of bread and cold meat untouched beside her. Nathaniel Cross knocked and entered only when she called. He carried a ledger. "The accounts, Mrs. Gray. Your godmother kept careful records. The property yields enough to maintain itself, with a small surplus. The tenants on the home farm are reliable." "You were a soldier before this," she said, not quite a question. A flicker in his eyes. "Captain 52nd Foot, wounded at Waterloo, came here to mend and your godmother kept me on." He paused. "I find peace in honest work." "As do I." The words slipped out before she could guard them. He did not seize the opening. He simply nodded, set the ledger on a side table and said, "If you need anything, the bell in the hallway rings to the kitchen. Sleep well, Mrs. Gray." When he left, Eleanor sat still for a long moment. The quiet of the house wrapped around her, but she did not feel alone. Somewhere beyond the window, the moor stretched into darkness, and for the first time in 5 years, no one expected her to be anything but what she was. In the morning, Betsy brought a London newspaper that the village carrier had delivered. Eleanor unfolded it and felt the bread turn to ash in her mouth. A small notice on the third page read, "The Duchess of Ashford has withdrawn from town due to a sudden indisposition of nerves. The Duke requests privacy for his family." Alexander was already rewriting the story, painting her as fragile, hysterical. If she returned, she would be trapped in a sick room, her words rendered weightless by a diagnosis of female weakness. If she stayed hidden, she was a runaway wife, the scandal a fuse burning toward explosion. She looked out the window and saw Nathaniel Cross walking the fence line, his stride even, his silhouette sharp against the gray sky. She did not know him, but she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she would need allies in the days to come. The investigator arrived on a Thursday, 3 days after the newspaper notice. Eleanor saw him from the upstairs window, a man in a sober black coat riding a hired horse, stopping at the village inn before making his way up the lane toward the cottage. She had imagined this moment a dozen times, but the reality was a cold fist closing around her throat. She found Nathaniel in the kitchen garden, mending a trellis. "There is a man coming. He works for my husband. He cannot find me here." Nathaniel straightened slowly. He did not ask why she was hiding, did not demand explanations. He simply wiped his hands on a cloth and said, "Go to the still room, bolt the door. I'll deal with him." She wanted to protest, to warn him of the danger, but he was already walking toward the front of the house. She retreated to the small stone room behind the kitchen, pressing her ear to the door. The knock came heavy and official, Nathaniel's voice calm as a lake at dawn. "Can I help you?" "I'm searching for a woman, tall, fair-haired, likely traveling with a maid. Might be using the name Gray. Have you seen her?" A pause. Eleanor held her breath. "This is my employer's property," Nathaniel said. "I've been alone here with the housekeeper for the past month. No visitors. If you'll state your business, I can direct you to the constable in Pickering." "No need." The investigator's tone soured. "If you see anyone matching that description, report it to the authorities. The family is concerned for her health." "I shall," Nathaniel said, and closed the door. He did not come to the still room immediately. Eleanor waited, her heart a wild drum. When he finally unbolted the door, his expression was unreadable. "He's gone, but he'll be back or others will. Mrs. Gray," he stopped, as though testing the name. "I don't know your story and I won't press for it, but if you mean to stay hidden, we'll need a better plan than bolted doors." Something cracked inside her, the careful wall she had built to keep her fear contained. "My name is Eleanor Ashford," she said quietly. "Or it was. I left my husband because I discovered that my marriage was a performance. The man hunting me is the Duke of Ashford. I have no legal right to vanish, and if he finds me, he can compel my return." Nathaniel absorbed this without flinching. "A duke?" "Yes." "And the property, is it yours legally?" "My godmother left it to me in her will. My husband never knew. I kept it as a secret, something of my own. I think I always knew I might need it." A long silence. Then Nathaniel Cross, former captain, a man who had faced cannon fire and cavalry charges, inclined his head. "Then we protect it, and you, until you decide what comes next." He did not touch her. He did not offer pity. He simply returned to the garden, picked up his trellis, and resumed his work as though the world had not tilted on its axis. Alina stood in the doorway, watching him, and felt the first stirring of something she had not felt in years. Hope, tentative and terrifying as new green shoots in frost-hardened earth. The letter from Alexander arrived by special messenger 10 days later, slipped under the cottage door at dawn. Alina recognized the ducal seal, the heavy paper, the aggressive slant of his handwriting. "Alina, your disappearance has caused considerable distress. I have been patient, but my patience has limits. Return to Ashford House within a fortnight and I will overlook this foolishness. If you do not, I will be forced to take measures. Your reputation, your fortune, your future, all of it depends upon my goodwill. Do not test me. Your husband, Ashford." She read it twice, then handed it to Nathaniel across the breakfast table. He scanned it, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "He threatens to ruin you. He is capable of it. He controls my settlements, my allowance, my place in society. If I do not return, he will paint me as a madwoman or worse." She paused, a new thought crystallizing. "But there is something he does not know. My godmother left me more than this cottage. She placed a sum in trust, managed through a bank in York, that is not linked to my marriage settlements. I never touched it, never mentioned it. It might be enough to sustain me if I can access it." Nathaniel set down his cup. "Then we go to York." They traveled together, Betsy as chaperone in a hired gig. Nathaniel drove himself. The road wound through the moors, heather blooming purple along the ridges, the sky a high, windswept blue. In the carriage, Alina was acutely aware of Nathaniel's presence, the quiet strength of his hands on the reins, the way he glanced back at her occasionally, checking, guarding. York was a tangle of medieval streets and bustling markets. At the bank, Alina's identity was verified by the manager, an elderly man who remembered her godmother well. The funds, a modest but independent sum of £2,000, were transferred into Alina's sole name. She walked out of the bank with a leather purse heavy against her palm and a lightness in her chest that felt almost like freedom. On the journey back, as the gig crested a rise and the moor spread before them like a rumpled velvet blanket, a pheasant burst from the gorse. The horse shied violently. Alina gasped and grabbed the side rail, but Nathaniel's hand shot out, steadying her before she could slip. His arm was solid as iron around her shoulders, and for a heartbeat she was pressed against the warmth of his chest, the scent of wool and leather and something clean, like wind over stone. "Steady," he murmured to the horse and to her. He did not release her immediately. When he did, his hand lingered a moment at her elbow. "Are you all right?" "Yes." Her voice was uneven for reasons that had nothing to do with the horse. "Thank you." He nodded and faced the road again, but the air between them had shifted. Alina stared at the back of his head, at the way the wind ruffled his dark hair, and realized with a jolt that she did not want to go back to a life where there was no Nathaniel Cross. As they reached the outskirts of the village, Nathaniel slowed the gig. A horse stood tethered outside the inn, a fine bay with a distinctive white blaze. Alina had seen that horse before. It belonged to the Ashford stables. "He sent another man," she whispered. Nathaniel's expression hardened. "Not a man, look." A tall figure emerged from the inn and Alina's blood turned to ice. Alexander himself, the Duke of Ashford, stood in the muddy village street, his greatcoat immaculate, his face a mask of cold fury. He had come north personally. The hunt was over. The war was about to begin. Alexander did not shout. He had never needed to raise his voice. His power was a quiet, poisonous thing that seeped into every room he entered. He stood in the parlor of Greywood Cottage as though he owned it, his gaze sweeping over the worn furniture with faint distaste. "You have made your point, Alina. Enough. You will return with me this evening." She stood by the hearth, Nathaniel a silent presence at her shoulder. "I will not. I heard you, Alexander, in the library with Cecilia Haverford. You said I would forgive you, that I always did. You were wrong." A muscle flickered in his jaw. A private conversation, exaggerated by a woman's sensibilities. You have a duty to your name, your position. Think of the scandal. "I have thought of nothing else. I am prepared to face it." He laughed a short, disbelieving sound. "Face it. You have no concept of what you are inviting. I will cut off your funds. I will announce that you have abandoned your home in a state of mental instability. I will make certain no decent house receives you. And as for your companion here," his eyes slid to Nathaniel with a contemptuous smile, "I will see him ruined. A steward living alone with a married woman. The courts will not look kindly on that." Nathaniel spoke for the first time, his voice level. "Your Grace, Mrs. Gray has legal possession of this property. You have no standing to remove her. As for my reputation, I have faced worse than slander." "Mrs. Gray," Alexander repeated mockingly. "How quaint. There is no Mrs. Gray. There is only my wife, the Duchess of Ashford, who is coming home." Alina reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded document, her godmother's will, copied and certified. She held it out. "This property was bequeathed to me, Alina Gray, free from the control of any husband. It is not part of the marriage settlement. It is not yours. It never will be. And I have another copy lodged with a solicitor in York, along with a sworn statement detailing your infidelity and your threats. If you move against me, Alexander, I will make your private conduct public. How will your creditors respond when they learn the Duke of Ashford cannot even control his own wife?" Silence stretched taut as a wire. The Duke's face went white, then red. For the first time, Alina saw something flicker behind his eyes that was not anger but fear. The Duke had debts. She had suspected it, but now she knew. "You would destroy yourself to spite me," he said softly. "I would free myself to live honestly. There is a difference." Alexander took a step toward her, and Nathaniel moved, not aggressively but deliberately, placing his body between them. The former captain did not speak. He simply stood, an immovable barrier. The Duke, a man accustomed to deference, stared at him with a hatred so pure it seemed to heat the air. "You will regret this," Alexander said, addressing them both. He turned on his heel and strode from the cottage. The sound of his horse's hooves faded into the dusk. Alina's legs gave way. She sat down hard in the nearest chair, trembling. Nathaniel knelt before her, his hands hovering near hers but not touching. "You were magnificent," he said quietly. A broken laugh escaped her. "I am terrified." "Terror is not the absence of courage, it is the test of it." He paused, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "I said I would stand with you. I meant it, whatever comes." She reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. No declarations, no promises beyond the moment. But the moment was enough. The Duke's retribution was swift and clinical. Within a week, a notice appeared in the London papers, couched in the language of genteel concern. "The Duchess of Ashford, having suffered a prolonged nervous collapse, has withdrawn to the country. Rumors of her whereabouts are unconfirmed, and the family requests that her privacy be respected." The implication was unmistakable. Alina was unwell, unreliable, a woman to be managed rather than believed. Society, which had once admired her poise, now whispered behind fans. Letters from acquaintances ceased. Betsy reported that the village shopkeeper, once friendly, now served her in tight-lipped silence. Worse followed. A solicitor's letter arrived, asserting the Duke's right to claim the Greywood property as a marital asset, citing a clause in the marriage settlement that supposedly entitled him to any inheritance acquired during the union. Alina's York solicitor countered, but the legal machinery began to grind, threatening to consume her modest funds in fees. And a rumor, poisonously specific, began to circulate in the district. The Duchess had eloped with a common steward, a man of no family, and was living openly in sin. Nathaniel felt the weight of it. A visit from the estate's trustee, a dry old man named Harrow, made the situation plain. Captain Cross, your service to the late Mrs. Hawthorne was exemplary, but the current situation reflects poorly on the property. I am obliged to ask whether you intend to remain under these circumstances. I intend to remain, Nathaniel said, his voice flat. Then I must advise you that the trustees are reviewing your position. A steward whose name is linked to scandal may not be considered suitable. When Harrow left, Alina found Nathaniel in the stable, his hands braced against a stall, his head bowed. She had never seen him so still. "You should go," she said, her voice cracking. "I am dragging you into the mud. I will not have your life destroyed for my sake." He lifted his head. "I made a choice, I make it again, every morning." "Nathaniel." "You are not an obligation, Alina." The use of her Christian name, first time he had spoken it, silenced her. "You are not a burden. You are the first thing in a decade that has made me want to build something instead of simply endure. If the trustees dismiss me, I will find other work. If society shuns you, we will build a society of two. Do not ask me to leave. I will not." She closed the distance between them, her heart a wild, aching thing. She did not kiss him. She simply rested her forehead against his shoulder, felt his arms come around her, careful and reverent, as though she were something precious and breakable. She breathed him in and let herself believe for a single suspended moment that they could survive this. But the world outside the stable was closing in, and the worst blow had not yet fallen. The letter from Lady Cecilia Haverford arrived on a wet Tuesday, written in a frantic, looping hand. Alina almost burned it unread, but something, some premonition, made her break the seal. "Duchess, I know you have no reason to trust me. I am the author of some of your misery, and I do not expect forgiveness. But Ashford has cast me aside. He promised me marriage when you were declared unfit, but he has now denied all knowledge of me. He is cruel, and I was a fool. I wish to make amends if such a thing is possible. Your husband is in greater debt than anyone knows. He has been borrowing against the estate for years, forging documents, using your name on promissory notes. I have seen the papers. He keeps a locked box in his study. The key is in a false book, Volume 3 of Gibbon's Decline and Fall. There are letters there that would prove his criminality. If you could obtain them, you would have the power to free yourself entirely. I do not ask for your pity. I only ask that you use this knowledge to stop him from destroying anyone else. Ch. Alina read the letter 3 times, her pulse a drumbeat of possibility. If this was true, it changed everything. Forgery was not a scandal, it was a crime. A duke could be ruined, imprisoned even. She brought the letter to Nathaniel. He studied it with the same strategic focus he must once have applied to battle maps. It could be a trap. He might be using her to lure you back to London. Or it could be the only weapon that will end this. I know that study. I know the false book she means. I saw it once years ago. Alexander made a joke of it, said every gentleman needed a hiding place. I never thought to look inside. Then we go to London. The decision was irreversible. They traveled by post-chaise, Betsy again their companion, the journey tense and silent. Alina's mind churned with memories of Ashford House, of the life she had led there, the woman she had been. That woman would have burned the letter and stayed hidden. This woman, the one Nathaniel Cross had helped her become, rode toward the fire. London was a blur of noise and smoke. They took rooms in a modest and under false names. Contact was made with a discreet man of business, a former army colleague of Nathaniel's who understood the art of quiet entry. On a moonless night, while the Duke was known to be at his club, Nathaniel and his man gained access to the Ashford townhouse through a servant's entrance Alina had described from memory. Alina waited in the carriage, her hands clenched until the knuckles showed white. Time stretched, elastic and cruel. Then Nathaniel returned, a leather dispatch box under his coat, his eyes bright with something fierce. "We have them, promissory notes." A letter to a moneylender with her name signed, badly forged. A contract for the sale of timber rights that don't exist, enough to hang him if the law cared to pursue it. And the law will pursue it, Elinor said, her voice steady now, once a magistrate sees these. The confrontation was not at the courts but at the home of Lord Redmayne, a respected peer and a man known to despise Alexander's brand of careless aristocracy. Elinor, with Nathaniel at her side, presented the documents and her sworn testimony. Redmayne, aghast, agreed to convene a private tribunal. The Duke was summoned. Faced with irrefutable evidence and the threat of public prosecution, Alexander Ashford crumpled. The arrogance drained from him, leaving a pale, sweating man who signed whatever papers were placed before him. A legal separation, full restitution of Elinor's property, a binding agreement that he would depart for the continent and never trouble her again. The scandal was contained, but the Duke's social death was absolute. His creditors descended. Within a month, Ashford House was shuttered, and the 6th Duke of Ashford had fled to France, a pariah. Spring came to the North York moors with a riot of gorse blossom and birdsong. Greywood Cottage had been repaired, the roof mended, the walled garden tamed and replanted. Elinor walked the gravel path between the lavender beds and felt the sun on her face with a quiet joy that no longer surprised her. The legal separation had been granted 6 months earlier. The gossip had run its course. Society, fickle as ever, had moved on to newer scandals. A few brave souls had even sent letters of tentative friendship, but Elinor found she had little appetite for London. The cottage, the moor, the steady rhythm of country life, these had become her world. Nathaniel had been retained as steward by the trustees after Harrow. The old man admitted that Captain Cross's conduct had been unexpectedly honorable under difficult circumstances. The formal words had made Nathaniel smile, a rare and transforming expression that Elinor treasured. This morning, however, he was not smiling. He stood by the garden gate, a box in his hands, his posture rigid with a nervousness she had never seen in him. "Elinor," he said, and she stopped, her heart giving a small, knowing leap. "I have waited. I wanted the world to settle, for you to have time to know your own mind without crisis pressing upon you, but I find I cannot wait any longer." He opened the box. Inside lay a ring, not a diamond but a simple band of gold set with a deep blue sapphire, the color of the moor sky at dusk. "I am not a duke. I am not wealthy or titled. I am a soldier who has found his peace in a quiet life and in the company of a woman of extraordinary courage. I will love you until the day I die, and I will spend every one of those days trying to be worthy of you. If you will have me, Elinor, I would be your husband." She did not hesitate. She stepped forward and cupped his face in her hands, the box and the ring and the world narrowing to the warmth of his skin, the steady beat of his heart against her palm. "You are worth 100 dukes," she said, her voice thick. "You are the best man I have ever known. I will have you, Nathaniel Cross, and I will never let you go." He kissed her then, a kiss that began gently and asking and deepened into an answer. The scent of lavender and turned earth surrounded them, and high above, a curlew called across the moor. They married in the village church 3 weeks later, with Betsy weeping happy tears in the front pew and a handful of tenants scattering flower petals. There was no notice in the London papers, no grand reception. There was only a quiet party at the cottage, a cake baked by Mrs. Timms, and a dance in the garden under a canopy of stars. Elinor Cross, a name she had chosen, a name she loved, stood with her husband at the edge of the moor as dusk fell. The future stretched before her, uncharted but no longer frightening. She had been a duchess, a possession, a woman who was expected to forgive. She had become something else entirely, a woman who had found the courage to leave, the strength to fight, and the grace to love again. Nathaniel took her hand, happy. She leaned into his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "Profoundly, and you?" "I have everything I never dared to want." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cross." Elinor smiled, and the last shadow of the Duke of Ashford dissolved into the twilight, leaving only the clean, clear promise of a life that was finally, completely her own.